Regarding particles, let's see all the available parameters that you can use within your project. You have this general description that you may add to make sure that you differentiate between different groups, and you eventually could say, okay, I want this to be screams, other explosions or something like that, so to have some additional information. Also, you can say how many particles do you want to use. Most of these parameters, numeric parameters, if you see when you move the mouse on top of this label, you can simply drag to increase or decrease, so it's going to be quite handy most of the times. So you say how many particles do you want to use. This is if you want to change the color of the particles, so eventually you can change this in terms of color. And also there is this recreate particles, that essentially what it's going to give you. It's going to recreate a different particle. So eventually you could create a particle group, you render, you listen, you say, okay, I like more or less the result, but there is a particle that is too close to the virtual microphone or something like that, and you eventually can come here and say, okay, simply give me a different particle system. So it's going to generate new particles, and it's almost like having a different take on the same scene. So you have a battlefield and you simply press in here and say, okay, give me a completely new battlefield sound, because I want particles to be on a different position, and simply then you in the end going to pick up what is the best sound that you prefer. Also, like I mentioned, all of these particles will use audio files, so you have to include some audio files. As you can see, there is even this red label over here, just to make sure that you know that you still need to add some audio files to be able to use it. So let's add some files. Imagine that I want a stamp file that I have somewhere. So eventually you can simply select your audio file. By default there is this player over here, so you can disable autoplay. The idea is for allow you to much more easier to navigate through your sound library and be sure that you are selecting the correct sound. If this is disabled, you can still listen to it directly. Also, there is some information about your file. In this case, you have information, you know, that is less than 1 second. And also, an important thing is, if you are importing a stereo file, you can do different ways, different behaviors. You can eventually only import the left channel, you can only import the right channel. Eventually you can convert this to mono and import only this mono version, or eventually you could say, okay, I want to include both channels but as different streams, which means that some particles will probably reproduce the left stream and other particles will reproduce the right stream of the file. So eventually you can specify what you want to do in terms of stereo files. Okay. Also, in here you have when you select an audio file, you can re-listen to it, or eventually use autoplay to make sure that you simply press and listen more easier instead of being always pressing the play or something like that. And also, of course, you can add several audio files, so eventually you can come here and say, okay, I want to include all of these files, and you simply create and import all of these files to the project. Also, there is this special impulse that sometimes you simply want to add some impulse. So this will give you some information about the impulse. Will create a stream only with a single impulse that sometimes could be interesting in some situations. So next, what you're going to say is, where do you want, what are the starting conditions of the particles. For instance, if you want them to start at 0 position, or eventually say no, I only want to start the particles at after 5 seconds or something like that. Also, you can specify, I'm going to increase the number of particles over here because this is going to give you a better overview. So eventually you may say where do you want particles to start, and you could say okay, I want all particles to be exactly at one position, eventually in a line, a circle line, inside the circle, a rectangle, a triangle, the surface of a sphere, inside the sphere, inside the cylinder, on the surface of a cylinder, a box, or eventually a torus. And in all of these positions, on all of these areas, you can specify things like the center position, the radius, and eventually the section. So eventually you can do all of these things and change things over here. So all of these parameters can be changed. Also, you can add some movement to the particles. By default, particles stay at the same place where they are created, and eventually you can come here and add some movements. And what movements are available? Currently there are linear behavior and spherical behaviors. Linear movements are essentially moving on a straight line. So imagine that you want all to have a random velocity up to 9 meters per second. You simply add this and all of them will have special movements. Okay, I'm going to talk a little more about movements later on. And also you have the audio modifiers, where you specify what audio modifiers you want to add, because most of the times you don't want all particles to have the exact same, to sound exactly the same. So eventually you can make all these changes over here.